Hi, welcome to the Strand. It's nice to have you all here. I am Jessica Strand, one of the events managers here, and no, I am no relation to the Bass family that has owned this bookstore since 1927. It's just a strange coincidence. Anyway, tonight I wrote this whole paragraph, which I'm going to cut, because I think we'd really get to the discussion rather than me natter on. So tonight we will be looking at censoring, why things are censored, why people are so hypocritical, why we indulge in private, why we censor publicly, what is perceived as too graphic, why it's too graphic, and I'm sure we're going to discuss many more things. So why I'm telling you what we're going to discuss is silly. Anyway, joining us this evening is Heide Hatry, who helped me to put this event together, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. She is a visual artist and a curator whose work challenges our perceptions of organs and flesh. Her books include Heads and Tails, Skin, and Not a Rose. Svetlana Mintcheva, the program director of National Coalition Against Censorship and the author of Exposing the Censor Within. Mintcheva has written on emerging trends in censorship, organized public discussions, and mobilized support for individual artists. She is also co-editor of The Censoring Culture, Contemporary Threats to Free Expression, and the author of Exposing the Censor Within. Jonathan Ames, at the end, known for his column about his sexual exploits in the New York Press, and the author of 8 books, including Wake Up, Sir, and The Alcoholic. He also wrote the HBO show Bored to Death. Carolee Schneemann is an artist whose work has redefined discourse surrounding the body, sexuality, and gender in art. Her multidisciplinary work has been shown at numerous venues, including the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, the Whitney, MoMA, the Pompidou. She's the recipient of many fellowships and grants, including a Guggenheim and an NEA. Anthony Haden-Guest, who has written several books, including True Colors, The Real Life of the Art World, and The Last Party, Studio 54, Disco, and the Culture of the Night. Gene Guberman, right next to me, is a licensed psychoanalyst who has practiced counseling, psychotherapy, and psychoanalysis for 35 years in New York City and New Jersey. And let this begin. 2 of the people on the panel tonight will have slide shows or presentations, and let me, welcome all of them here.
Oh, there hasn't been a kiss from your soft lips. This is not a rose. This is not a rose.
I love this idea. You can almost attach it to the idea of a really perverse take on the ready-made. She's taking the sort of unmade of the animal body and returning it into a ready-made that then she transforms. And it's that interrelationship that produces these hybrid objects that are both flower, animal, they're both beautiful, they're both horrific.
It seems to me a flower made out of animal parts has this wonderful kind of push and pull and tension and conflicting reactions, because one part of the brain reacts to it as we would to a flower, an object of attraction and beauty and harmlessness. Another part might react as we do to animal parts with disgust.
You're forced into a kind of zone of shock and horror. It's like having a subliminal message interjected into a spool of film, where for this one brief moment, your mind confronts something that it finds horrifying, that it doesn't want to think about, and somehow that seed is planted, and as a result of this art, you're compelled to think about a whole range of difficult issues.
The reaction is not amusement or titillation, it's disgust, it's absolute disgust. And the question is, what's the difference? And I think here there's also an important connection to our understanding of the difference between, say, the genres of erotica on the one hand and pornography on the other.
I didn't buy them the tongues and started making flowers, but I thought, oh my god, they look like flower petals. And then, as it always works in my creative process, it just stored somewhere in the back of my head. And then I see something else, and think, oh my god, I could use that as a petal and this other as an inside part, and it would totally look like a flower. And then I saw in everything petals and stamen.
It's very beautiful, and one of the things that contemporary theory, particularly semiotic, seems to avoid is anything having to do with beauty. So that's going to be very challenging with your new work, that these are beautiful things, and of course they so deeply relate to all the phobias about our bodies, particularly the horrific phobias about the female body.
I know about slaughterhouses, they're terrible. So it's amazing that you can use these parts and make something beautiful out of them. It's wonderful. That's a really good thing to do.
Heide's flowers are really possessed. I sometimes think maybe they're a little bit angry. The new flower fairies are, I think, bent on revenge, and they sow as they deserve. I spoke with a famous anthropologist who told me, he said, Anthony, we've ruined the world in our lifetime. And I think it's true, it's absolutely true. And I take comfort in Heide's flowers.
This is not a rose. This is not a rose. This is not a rose. This is not a rose.
I am very thrilled to be here. Not only to be here in my favorite bookstore, in which I was 25 years the first time, a very long time, buying books like crazy because I had a bookstore in Heidelberg, and here all the books we wanted in Germany were very cheap, and I loved it here. But also because these absolutely wonderful people here are on the panel, and I'm very, very happy about that. I will not speak long because first you know already what I'm doing, and second, language is not really my language to communicate, but art. So I will only talk very briefly about censorship situations in my life and not in general, because all my other projects, they were much more censored or much more taboo than this one. This seems to be not a problem for most people. But what was very interesting and unexpected for me was that it is not so easy as you would maybe think to get these parts which are used for these flowers. Everything that you cannot buy in a butcher shop is basically taboo. In a slaughterhouse, it's thrown away. But even butchers have some problems with these other parts. They become very suspicious when you ask for pig eyes or chicken heads or goat tongues or whatever. And they become very upset and squeamish or angry and violent when you ask them for private parts. Although they work all day with that, you wouldn't think that. So I learned that if you want to have animal parts, you have to come up with convincing lies. So if you want pigskin, for example, you say, I'm a tattoo artist and I want to practice my art. Or if you want to have fetal pigs, you say, I'm a biology teacher and my students need to dissect these pigs, or whatever. But for genitals, I never came up with a good lie. So in the slaughterhouse, it would be very easy because they have these huge amounts of stuff they dispose. Containers and containers stand outside of the slaughterhouse, and I was only one time allowed to just take the stuff out of it, what I wanted. But normally, and especially in America, there is no way you can not even get to these containers. So I was trying to find butchers, farmers who slaughter their animals themselves. And when I asked when I came so far to ask them for private parts, that was when they thought there was something seriously wrong with me. And even if I showed them the flowers I had made already, and they liked them, but they really didn't want to be involved in something like crazy or insane or maybe criminal as that. And so a few butchers I could convince to give me something, they acted while they were giving me the stuff very strange as well. So one of them, he giggled all the time when he cut off the penis from a sheep. He couldn't believe that he's doing what he was doing. Although he's doing this all day long, just he cuts off other parts. I found that very strange. And the only experience I had, which was kind of as I expected it, but it was very surprising because that was not what normally happened, was in Dallas. I went to a deer processor, and if you go to a deer processor, you kill your deer in the woods, you gut it, you leave all the disgusting stuff there for the animal, for the other animals to eat. Then you bring the deer to the processor, pay $65, and then you come a week later, and everything is packed in nice, sweet packages with labels on them. And I went there and thought they must have a lot of stuff. And when I asked, do you have private parts of deers? He said, female or male? And I was quite surprised that he was so, that this didn't seem to be a problem to him. And I said, male and female, please. And he said, 10, 100, 1,000? And I said, oh, 100 is okay, 50 female, 50 male. And he said, when? And I said, now. And he said, are you insane? How would I have now 100 private parts from deers? And but he took me to the it's a kind of room which is a refrigerator, and checked what was hanging there. And he looked between the legs of the animals which were hanging in this refrigerator and said, "You are lucky. They all didn't do a good job. They all left the genitals in the deers, although they are supposed to leave them in the woods." So, and he was very proud and very happy when he gave me these parts. So I'm ending with this exception, and tell you one story of a butcher who said he would, in his sausage, which he would make, he would definitely not use private parts, because this would be really disgusting to imagine that you would eat pussy.
Sausage pussy.
Until I was 11 or 12, I didn't realize there was a second set of labia on the inside, since you couldn't see them. What's even funnier is that I thought urine came out of the clitoris. When you're standing up, all you see from the front is hair. Between your legs there are two soft, cushiony things, also covered with hair, which press together when you're standing so you can't see what's inside. They separate when you sit down, and they're very red and quite fleshy on the inside. In the upper part, between the outer labia, there is a fold of skin that, on second thought, looks like a kind of blister. That's the clitoris. Now, before you start cringing and think I'm going to share all my personal memories with you, this is not my diary. This is the diary of Anne Frank, widely taught in American schools. However, this diary was just challenged last week because of this particular passage. A mother in a Michigan school district said this is pornographic. And I don't want my daughter to read about that. You know, she could read about a girl being killed in the Holocaust, but she cannot read that she has a clitoris. She cannot read about her own anatomy. So this was the same state where a legislator, Lisa Brown, you probably heard, was reprimanded and banned from speaking on the floor of the House because she said vagina during a debate about abortion. Republican Representative Mike Kelton, in the same state, said what she said was offensive. It was so offensive, I don't even want to say it in front of women. I would not say that in mixed company. Meanwhile, in Wasilla, Texas. This sculpture, it's part of a Percent for Art creation. It's sitting in front of a school, and it was unveiled, and suddenly there's this concern that this sculpture reminds people of a vagina. And it immediately is covered, a scandal follows, and it was subsequently uncovered. But there was a big kind of nationally prominent scandal around it. So if this slab of stone could remind people of a vagina and be a reason to remove it, of course, flowers are also the obvious association because they are, of course, genitals. And this is work by an artist, Marge Forrest, which was part of a traveling bank show. So it was exhibited publicly in different banks, traveling around the country. Women loved it. However, that was taken off. Some people in a bank complained this was too disturbing. They don't want to look at this work, so it was taken down. And this is a very recent case. It's a California museum which commissioned this mural, and I can't even tell you the details because it's an ongoing issue. It just happened last week. A city manager said, well, this really reminds me of fallopian tubes. You should take it down. And sure, why? What will happen? Children will see it, fallopian tubes, that will be endlessly traumatizing, clearly. So when Heidi asked me to write for the book, of course, I thought, oh yes, flowers, of course. People think flowers, genitals. I really want to write about flowers as genitals. And then I asked her to put the most obscene flower to accompany my article. And that's the one she put, which is also here. And I show the book to people, and they look at the other flowers and say, they're really beautiful. And then they come to this one, and they're like, no, this is weird. we don't like this one. This is not that beautiful. And I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, what makes it so unbeautiful and so disturbing? And one thing is, if you look closely at it, it has little hairs. And hairs really kind of push it into tourist disgust. And when we look at the U.S. definition of obscenity, which is our, this is something that the Constitution does not protect, obscenity, it's about sex, but it's also about disgust. It's about what is patently offensive, i.e. what repels you. So it's this thing about genitals that they're both, there's this attraction, repulsion thing. And when we think of the classical nude, the classical female nude does not have visible genitals. It's smooth. And there was this apocryphal story about John Ruskin, who, aestheticist, art historian, looked at many nude in Italy, and then this is my phone. And then he got married, and on his wedding night, he just could not find it in himself to approach his wife. He was disgusted by her because, and he didn't say why. He said, people wonder why she's so beautiful. She was, there's a film coming out about her, Effie. Effie is a kind of icon of beauty for that time. And said people wonder why I would abstain from a woman who, to most people, was so attractive. But though her face was beautiful, her person was not formed to excite passion. On the contrary, there were certain circumstances in her person which completely checked it. So people have been wondering since what were those circumstances, and one was the presence of pubic hair, because the ideal nude, the classical nude, has no pubic hair. But the moment pubic hair appears, she's real, and that has been questioned. But pubic hair also became the reason for a scandal in 1917 when this Modigliani exhibition created a scandal and the police closed it. Why? Because Modigliani's nudes had pubic hair. So what bothers me about censorship, which I work with every day at NCAC, is not only, there's the power play, of course, there's white male legislators telling female legislators not to mention the word vagina, even though they can control what they do with their vaginas, whether they have an abortion or not. But there's also this aim to resolve the seductively perverse balance of attraction and repulsion that constitutes our erotic pleasure, in a way. You need the tension of both. So, and censorship splits the world into clean and dirty, into corruption and innocence, into real and ideal. And where our pleasure resides is in the in-between, this slippage, this kind of doubt and ambivalence. And that's why censorship impoverishes the world. It makes it more boring, especially when we're talking about sexuality, and when we're talking about politics, it's a different story. So I'm glad we're having this conversation around Heide's book.
Okay, so do some censorship history. My first self-shot film, 1965, Fuses, was constantly censored. Even 4 years ago, it was shown at a student film program in El Paso, and somebody called the police. They took away, they didn't know exactly what was obscene, so they took the kid who was getting $2 an hour and the projector and the film, and they took it all to the local prison. In 1965, the issue for me was conflating pop art and the degree of mechanization, the obsessive depiction of female figuration, but they were very hugely mechanized. There was never lubricity or orgasm or any definition of a fusion. So my position had to be that this was lived experience and it could not be pornography because it was coming from my own self-determination, my own lived experience. But every roll of film that went to be developed had to go to Denver, to Brackage's lab. Every roll of film had to have a letter from a psychiatrist saying this work was an archetypal study of the cross. One of your friends. So one of the contrasts that interests me now is the Duchamp, étant donné, where the female genital is, where is it? There it is displaced, obliterated, castrated, we might say, and so it's work like that that's in the cultural canon that would provoke me and inspire me to project and include actual genitalia. I'll use my own because then I can't be accused of director pornography. In recent installation concerned again with the morphology of forbidden form. This is an ancient Paleolithic vulva goddess, and it's in a configuration of motorized violins and a continuous projection of various curved parts, some commonplace and some forbidden. So each of these projected images is about 9 feet high. Well, let's keep going into a different structure of taboo, a work made in the middle 70s addressing menstrual taboo. This is called Blood Work Diary, where I decided I should chart the process and the marking of menstruation as a daily diary. And these tissues were put around actually my boyfriend's place in London. We tried to keep the cats away. So it has a strange elegance, and of course it's about time factoring. It's a very basic consideration of essential fluids of what the body can produce. And the work, strangely enough, is actually in a private collection in Europe, which was surprising to all of us. This is a work, self-shot. It's about seepage, where I used very ordinary domestic objects and juxtaposed them with kind of subtle range of explicit sexual connections. And it's been censored with the kind of perceptual, independent censorship where people begin to eroticize the ordinary objects. So they don't see a toothbrush anymore. They see, depending on how it affects them, a weapon. Or they don't see an open mouth. They see a glaring chasm. But it's a very innocent work in its intentionality. And finally, my most recent troublesome work is Vulva's Morphia. It's a work in which I was accumulating images of vulvic sources from Paleolithic shards to scientific odd renderings to personal physical images, and to make this photo grid with, there's a text running under them. The vagina dentata, that alligator, I was very lucky to find it. It was on, the logo for a very short-lived restaurant on 23rd Street. And I saw it and I said, this is going to play right into my essay, but I better get it before they close. So it didn't last as long as one would have hoped. So all these sequences are calculated to defeat explicit expectations of what's obscene and what should be censored. I'm working with nature, science, my own body, and some vagaries of popular culture, including that, what do you call it? What? Yeah, the weights and measure thing that has a banana on it that was found in an article in a German newspaper. I thought that's a vulvic associative elements, conscious or not.
A scale.
It's a scale, exactly. Thank you, scale, yeah. And my most recent work that is implicitly erotic will be shown at PPOW, opening Saturday and going through June. Its title is Flange, 6 RPM, and all the forms are in motion. And that implication can be followed erotically or left alone. Okay.
Hi. Hello, is that, yeah. Okay, I would like to start with making a general point. We've been talking mostly about sex. In fact, we've been talking entirely about sex. Dr. Heide's book is about sex, but censorship is part of surveillance. It's part of surveillance by the state or by various institutions. In the last 2 weeks, I read a poll in the New York Times saying that an overwhelming majority of people are in support of more camera surveillance on the streets. Today, the headline of the New York Post is you can make a gun using 3D modeling. So that state surveillance is more and more people are saying it's a great idea. And one knows, we know from experience, that when you give the police powers, they will use them. But it's just an unhappy bargain. We're going to give them these powers because they're necessary. So I think sex has now become the last battleground. It's kind of a safe place where we can fight these battles and struggles. It used to be part of a much wider battleground. In 1970, or maybe 1971, I went to Amsterdam to something called the Wet Dream Festival, which was set up by Germaine Greer of Suck magazine. And it was a festival of 4 days of pornographic films, the complete the world underground more or less convened there. And in between these increasingly boring films, I have to say, there were cultural moments, and in one of them, we're all milling around in a hall, I remember it vividly, called the Cosmos, and 4 naked Teutons appear amongst us. And as was the way with the avant-garde, there were 2 very cute Frauleins, and 2 not particularly cute guys, one of them carrying a carving knife and a goose. And a woman standing behind me said, "Anthony, that is crazy Otto Moule. He's going to cut the head off the goose and use what remains to perform live sex acts on the girls, and you're going to have to stop this." That woman is sitting behind me. She did not expect this to come up this evening. Well, I'd had enough white wine that I talked to my friend, a rather larger friend, a writer, another writer. I grabbed the goose, and Heskett grappled with Otto Moule, and I took the goose out of the Cosmos and gave it to a hippie on a barge who probably had it for dinner. But nonetheless, it was not butchered. It was not made of spectacle. However, the whole of the Wet Dream Festival then convulsed. We were condemned by everybody as British sentimentalists, and we were accused of censorship. The Spartakists came to our defense, saying that we were attacking the bourgeois art world. It wasn't really. I just had quite a lot of white wine. But to this day, that still survives on the internet as an example of censorship. Now, I think, potty training is censorship. I initially was going to ask the audience, if there'd been more young and callow people, whether anybody here supported 100% censorship. But I suspect nobody here does. I think the kind of overt and open sexuality we're talking about is obviously a very good thing. I don't consider it particularly controversial anymore. The kind of the surrealist movement specialized in the use of symbols, whether strong, they relied heavily on Freud and so forth. There's a lot of openness. I suppose the main controversy now is how young does one get, but unfortunately, however young people get, they all have access to the internet. The battle still goes on, it still rages, it's a good healthy battle, and I don't see law enforcement getting very involved. They've got other things on their minds these days. I guess that's what I need to say.
Can I do an addenda about the goose?
Okay, please.
Yeah, I just want to do an addendum. I am very familiar, as you may be, with Otto Moule, part of the Actionismus. Otto believed that anything he fucked would gain transcendence, and that applied to women who were serving breakfast and their children. So I knew him very well. He's a brilliant artist, and at this festival he came out on a platform and did very violent sexual actions with his troupe, and the troupe gave permission to be beaten with what do they have, those rolling pins and different accoutrements. He then appeared with a beautiful frightened goose, and the goose was putting its neck into Otto's neck and quivering with fear from the huge audience. The goose did not see the big knife in his hand. So knowing Otto, it was going to be a kind of eroticized murder of this fragile, beautiful, white-feathered goose. And I just panicked, and I grabbed Anthony and Heathcote and said, "You guys, you do English sports, get that goose." The goose did not give permission to be slaughtered for this event. And I suppose it's a rare instance of interfering with another compatriot's work, but they saved the goose, and you got beaten and hit on the head by Otto, but
that is true.
You got the goose. Yeah.
Gene.
I think, but I don't know. Of course, we all, it's a. I'm not 100% against censorship. Obviously, I don't think we all say we are, but I don't think we are. We wouldn't want a hoarding showing a girl being fucked by a donkey to go up next to a kid's school, would we? They do it. They call it zoning or something, but they prevent it from happening. It's a civilized society, and one should have as much freedom as is, does not destroy that society, I guess. It's a difficult issue, case by case.
Thank you. We wonder why The genitals give us so much pleasure. And yet, there are many people who are conflicted about the pleasure of their genitals and develop genital phobias. We wonder why some people feel anxious and guilty about their thoughts and their feelings and their actions, whereas other people are very open about their sexual lives, exhibitionistic, and don't seem concerned about their sexual lives. From my practice, there have been a number of patients that have genital phobias, and they suffer because they can't enjoy their genitals and have social constraints. One young man was phobic about penetrating women. He avoided having intercourse with women. A phobia is more than a fear. It means you avoid something. And so in the work with him, I uncovered his unconscious wishes that led to his fear of penetration. One of them was his wish to hurt women with his penis. He imagined his penis as a weapon, and so he would find himself losing erections, if he ever was with a woman, to protect her and himself from hurting her and from his embarrassment of having such unsavory ideas of being so hostile. The thing about symptoms like phobias is that part of the symptom is that there's some kind of self-punishment. So what happened because of his unconscious hostility towards women? He was suffering from being unable to have intercourse. So that's how he punished himself for his hostility. Yet he thought he was protecting women by losing his erections. This wasn't conscious. This came out in the analysis. One woman was so terrified to have a man penetrate her. She imagined it would be so painful she couldn't let more than the tip of a man's penis enter her. And even that felt unbearable to her. Even though doctors would manually stretch her vagina and told her she had a normal vagina that could accommodate the majority sizes of men's penises. The analysis uncovered her unconscious fantasies. For example, she wanted to be a man, and she wished to seize control of a man's penis. Not to hurt it or bite it, like in vagina dentata, but to steal it, possess it as her own, so that she could feel like a man in her imagination. But the thing is that as we talk about the mysterious leap from the mind to the body, she would create the sensation of pain, more than physiologically determined by doctors and others who examined her. Yes, you can have pain from penetration. There's that normal bit of pain. Some would say it's pleasurable pain. But if you're an aging woman and your skin is slowly thinning, there's pain. You need lubrication. And other realities to the fact that you can feel pain. But this was an imaginary pain that she was creating. When she understood her issues, accepted her wishes and her fantasies, she was able to stop having the pain and enjoy intercourse So, and again, her symptom had punishment in it because she deprived herself of pleasure and of intercourse. So she had a part of her genital phobia was a self-punishment. So now, as you've seen in the panel, meanings are what's very interesting to us analysts. The meanings of how we interpret reality. The genitals hold different meanings for each of us, our own genitals and other people's genitals. So beauty and terror is in the eyes of the beholder. And these meanings can be consciously known or unconsciously unknown. We don't know what we don't know. We all have blind spots. But we don't know we have blind spots. So the same issues apply when viewing art. In when I was writing for Heide's book, which I all hope you buy, I mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe and how she tried to represent flowers as objectively represented. And feminists hailed her work because they saw vaginas in her flowers. Of course, Georgia resented that interpretation and said she didn't have sex on her mind. So when viewing Heide's work, people have voyeuristic genital phobias and maybe other phobias underneath. So in conclusion, the symptoms that people have are determined very early in life from environmental influences, cultural taboos, religious factors, family dynamics, and each symptom, each phobia is multi-determined or over-determined, and other sexual dysfunctions like inability to have an erection or can't feel sensations. One of my patients, whenever he had an orgasm, he didn't feel it. And, well, so when we do therapy, we deconstruct everyone's meanings, and we get to the bottom of their irrational motivations and fantasies that they feel anxious and guilty about. And like a flower in full bloom, we peel away the layers, and we get to the core issues, or the stigma, as you would if you're a botanist, and allow people to experience their sexuality and enjoy sexual gratification. Thank you again.
There are 3 empty chairs here, so people that are standing on the sides could just come and sit there, like actually 4. There's one in the back.
One brave person strolling across. Okay. Well, I'm here because Heide showed me her work and asked me to write something for her book, and my first response to her work was, I don't remember what I wrote exactly, nature of my mind, and I don't know. Well, I don't remember what I wrote exactly, but I mostly was addressing my own kind of tormented relationship with our food today, and how destroyed our food supply has become, whether it be our grains or our meat, and how on some level I'm disturbed by this but in denial about it, because I also think of the human body as being very strong and cockroach-like, and I can eat most anything and get by. So I'm a little bit of a male anorexic in that I don't know why I had to say male, but anyway, that's a little bit of censorship. I'm somewhat anorexic. I eat a big meal in the morning, and then I basically starve the rest of the day, and then late at night, stoned and tipsy. I hope that part will be deleted on YouTube. I'll eat again quickly, probably something slightly toxic. But there's a huge stretch in the middle where I'm not absorbing anything toxic or foul, or who cares anyway, because I'm going to die regardless. But nevertheless, I have a horror about our food and what's happened to it over the years. And I recently was on a food and wine tour in Australia, and the whole thing, I went there as a journalist. It was an absurd, gluttonous trip, which I cut short. But anyway, everything was about going back to the farm, you know, and basically people preparing and eating food the way we once did, as opposed to processed grains and you know, tortured animals and everything we hear about in our liberal media. And I'm assuming some of it's true. So, or illiberal media. So anyway, that's why I initially responded, because I thought it was bringing to light, this is meat. We all eat meat. Let's acknowledge it, or try to have some consciousness about what we're putting in our bodies all over the world. The other aspect that drew me to the work was the universality of beauty, that these bits of flesh cut away, you know, and a lot of what we're talking about is perception, were beautiful. And you know, so the interconnection of all things was also, I thought, powerful. So that's sort of why I'm here. I wrote for the book. But about censorship, I don't have any firm ideas myself. I see my intellect as part of a huge flux that has no sense of black and white or what's right and wrong. So it would seem at this point in time in human history that, you know, compassion, tolerance, non-censorship is maybe the way to go, but I can't be 100% certain myself, so I just kind of take a Switzerland-like position in the middle. And I'm just sort of neutral on anything political myself, because I tend to see myself as a privileged clown-like prince who is able to float through life without too much suffering, but I don't deserve to have an opinion about things. But I would probably, because of whatever training I've had, fall on the liberal side of things, and I like what you said, that it somehow denourishes our society if we have excessive censorship. On a personal level, my first novel, and then I'll wind up, was very much inspired by Hubert Selby's Last Exit to Brooklyn. I read that at 22, and I was just blown away by what seemed like this overt honesty and sexuality and rawness. And I was like, I want to write something like that. And I wanted, maybe I was looking for self-forgiveness. And so a lot of my early work, I was putting things out there that maybe people would be ashamed of. Later, it became a little bit of a shell game. I might admit things so that I could hide other things. At this point in my life, 49, shame seems to be winning. And I don't want to expose myself, and I'm, you know, applying a lot of self-censorship in my own little circle of looniness that just, I'm the only person involved. But, so I just want to censor myself. I have a lot of shame. I'm hoping to outlive it or just go to the grave with it. I'm not very hopeful about the whole thing. I know there are therapists in the audience, but, and on the panel, or to somehow get to another level with my own shame and self-censorship. At the moment, I'm in a transition phase where there is definitely more self-hate and shame than acceptance. At the moment, I'm up here a little bit blithe because of whatever I've put into myself. But I would say for the most part, I am someone who does want to censor himself. So I don't know. I'm just putting out these ideas. Everyone else, my role was to sort of respond empathically after everyone had spoken. And I liked what everyone had to say, and I liked all the images, and I feel lucky to be here right now. So that's it.
That was fun, Jonathan.
Thank you. I didn't realize you were a doctor until the introduction. But we all met at Le Pain Quotidien, that's a terrible French accent, and people went around, so what are you going to talk about? And it was like, vagina, he said genital phobia, and it was like sort of an odd AA meeting of some kind. But I didn't know what qualified him to talk about genital phobia until we got to the intros here, so now I know. And so I'm glad you're helping people in their struggles. in the moment. I mean, that's all we have.
But Jonathan, you have so much compassion. You should have compassion for yourself.
I know. I do, because I'm still here.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I eat and I breathe and I try to love others, but I'm telling you, it's rough on the inside.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone identifies. We live in New York.
Sure,
I mean, everyone's terrified at 3 a.m. and feels lonely.
But we all self-censor. I think that's brilliant, actually. We all self-censor.
It seems like you two could have a prolonged conversation.
Well, I'm trying to get my, this is a free session right now.
That's true.
We'll have a drink afterwards.
I actually liked everyone's presentation. Go ahead.
I think what comes out, we're all both censors and self-censored. We all want to censor somebody and censor ourselves. But I want, what Anthony said struck me, that he said, well, where do we draw the line? Because we all want to censor something. How much freedom can we take? And he says, we can have as much freedom as does not destroy our society. And I find that very scary, because think of segregation. We destroyed that society. Think of Carolee's work. Carolee's work wants to destroy a society that is very kind of hostile and denies women's pleasure. So with every kind of freedom, we are destroying something. And I think the censors are not, the kind of power censors, the them, but also the us. There is a kind of insistence on the status quo. We don't want to destroy it. We want to kind of be free, but we don't want there to be consequences. So my question is, don't we also want to destroy it? Is it so bad to, is that where we put the boundary, the freedom that does not destroy our society? If we're to move on, if we have a static society, we have total censorship. We have we have a kind of total surveillance.
Well, he was appealing to a greater good. He was saving the dignity and immediately the life of the goose. He put that, and Carolee suggested that he put that ahead of the performance or the butchery that was about to occur in front of them. That's an ad hoc decision, but it was censoring for sure. But
I'm actually kind of asking about the principle. In terms of the goose, it was, there's this this line between action and speech. Killing or having sex with a goose is action more than speech, no? It actually, under animal cruelty laws in the U.S., it would be animal cruelty. It would be an action, not speech. Because, if I go and say, hit you, I might be expressing my, feelings, or somebody else, but it will not be speech. It will be an action. But the principle of kind of destroying a certain status quo is what interests me.
Sure, because...
But where do you take that to the principle of violence against other people? The assault on the goose was a pure metaphor for transposition of rape. The goose did not give permission for the violence that was going to be done to it.
Sure, like some children or fetuses. But your point is well taken. We censor our wishes to destroy. We each have, in my opinion, wishes to destroy. We have hostile wishes. We get mad at people and we say, I want to kill you. We say it offhandedly. But yet inside ourselves, we have wishes to destroy. We have sadism inside ourselves. And when it comes to try to make changes in ourselves and in society, something has to give way for something else to take place. So I appreciate your point that for freedom of speech or action, for our society to make changes, something needs to be destroyed. Of course, that word destroy arouses a lot of feelings in people, and so we don't want to say destroy. We say we want to change, make changes.
Change is not necessarily destroying other things. You cannot slowly move and then you're going to destroy it.
Oh.
Well, that's true. Change is evolutionary, although change can also be revolutionary.
Yeah, but revolution is not necessarily transcendent.
You mean to say that when you try to make a change, we're not destroying someone in reality, but there's a concept being changed or destroyed. When we change our opinions and our feelings and our judgments, something something vanishes and something replaces it.
Yeah, but I think you cannot automatically assume that change correlates to destruction.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Change does not automatically mean destruction. It's evolutionary, but it doesn't mean it doesn't include destruction.
It can be also a very pleasant process, actually.
Yes, it could be pleasant, it could be destructive, it could be a lot of things.
The situation people are in, it might even be enjoying, full of joy to go through that change.
I agree with you. Well, I'm not phobic about the idea of destroying something.
I think some other...
Go ahead.
By the way, I don't agree at all that censors all want to destroy. I get censored quite often. I'm a cartoonist, and sometimes I made a rape joke, which was censored, and it was not a joke about rape, it was a joke about rape jokes. But the distinction was lost on the editor. I was censored, not exactly censored, I had a thing going up today on it's about more or less the shape of the world today. The last two lines are, or almost the last two lines are, bombs are going off all over the place, we must look like Party Planet from outer space. And there was a serious discussion about whether we could do this in the light of what happened in Boston. No one was trying to destroy what I wrote. They were trying to make it publishable. And it's a highly sensitive time. I think a lot of censorship is with good intentions, as a matter of fact. We have often we have to fight against it, and often we are right. I think one should be able to make jokes about absolutely anything, as a matter of fact. But not everybody agrees on that.
Could I bring something up? Of course, there's the battle for free expression of sexual matters has been going on for at least 45 or so years. The earliest books on erotic art in the contemporary period were in the late 60s. That Swedish couple, I remember. But and as an artist myself, who's pushing boundaries of legitimacy, I know that I also live in a world where there's terrible violence against women, and I have to ask the question. What kind of society do we have? I'm very skeptical of thinking of society as some kind of unitary concept. We have extremely conflicting groups in this society. We have people who are extremely nervous about their sexuality. We have people devoted to the patriarchy without even thinking about it. We have extremely self-aware people, such as the ones in this room. And let's face it, we're a kind of intellectual and artistic elite, and we can address ourselves and enjoy this art. And yet, when I produce something like that, and I also read articles about 15-year-old girls who commit suicide after being raped and called a slut, I just wonder, I feel, does my art have anything to do with that? Is it on another plane? I mean, this is what's going on today. We both want to liberate ourselves and want to be able to enjoy the pleasure of our bodies, want to achieve emotional health, and yet we have extremely destructive forces. We have reactionary forces, we have controlling forces, we have profit-driven forces, and we have patriarchal forces. Then we have, of course, the politically censoring forces that are trying to make the world safe for the corporations. And all this is going on, and here we're having this discussion over censorship of sexually explicit materials. I just wonder if you would address some of these larger questions and some of these conflicts in society, so that we're not just talking about the abstract censorship and abstract society. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to dominate this discussion. I liked what you said about the conflicts in society, because I opened up by talking about there are conflicted individuals. For example, some men who are loath to be in touch with their feminine wishes, their wishes to be women or have sexual female wishes, they want to destroy that in themselves, so they take it out, scapegoat other women, and so they wind up hurting other women to really externalize their own self-hatred. So, but that's like a personal thing. You identified a number of institutions and that we're all in conflict about, and that is the interface of all those conflicts leads us on an external plane to always be in controversial waters. I'm always interested, besides all that, I'm also interested in how people inside deal with self-censorship, repression, denial, defense mechanisms, and how they are so conflicted with their own inner lives that they wind up with symptoms, and then they act them out in society.
I mean, and I think if we think of where, obviously we have many social problems, but when we think of where censorship intersects with social problems, it's at a very interesting point. And as Gene was saying, there are many, our behavior is overdetermined. There are personal factors, there's social factors and so on, but isn't it easy to say that if we silence certain types of media, everything will be resolved? And I'm going to veer away slightly from sex into violence right now, and we had the Newtown killings, and immediately what comes? Oh, well, can we control guns? No, obviously we can never control guns. But what we maybe should control is violent video games. So there is this kind of impulse to resolve something that is a deep social problem, and there are many, many causes to it. But why not have a magic bullet solution, and for which has bipartisan support, and get on this, pulpit and say, violent media cause it. Or when we talk about sexual violence, media cause it, pornography cause it. I grew up the other side of the Iron Curtain, where I had no access to pornography, really. I'd never seen pornography until I left until I was out in the West. There was violence against women. There's countries in the Middle East that ban pornography. There is violence against women. It is not, the kind of cause-effect is not straight. Human beings' brains are complicated. And once we censor something, we're not going to resolve the social problem. But it's very easy politically to say, let's not tackle poverty. Let's not tackle how we raise our children. Let's not give money to education. Let's just ban violent video games. This is going to solve our problems. And that's why censorship becomes dangerous, when it also is a distraction from doing something really effective.
Well, I think art, such as Heide's and some of mine, releases the suppression and the denial and the self-destructive impulses in parts of society that we can reach. And once you've reached them, some of it spreads like a very healthy wildfire. And in popular culture, I would definitely mention Lady Gaga and the meat dress, which we associate with recent art history that her managers must know about. I'd also always say that Key and Peele, if you haven't followed their work, they're incredible. There is no suppression that these two dark comedians fail to address, and they're brilliant and revelatory when it comes to the body, to pets, to black culture, to food. Key and Peele, does everybody follow them? K-E-Y is a smaller black guy, and Peele is a paler, lithe one. And P-E-E-L-E. I mean, it's very symbolic. Their names are Key and Peele.
It's like a soccer player, Paley. Anyway.
Oh, you find them on YouTube.
Sunday Times Magazine illustrating articles.
That was stupid, but
that was them.
That was them. Yeah, that was them.
When talking about comedy and censorship, of course, everybody might think of Lenny Bruce, who famously said, well, when I have kids, I'm not going to let them watch Westerns and war movies, but I'm going to let them watch all the pornography they want, because I want my son to sort of see, take that pillow and put it under the woman so that she's comfortable, and do everything you can. And so do you think with the widespread access to pornography that in maybe 50 or 100 years there will be less tendency to want to censor sexual matters, and but then of course we have the co-equal thing of the video games in their ascendancy as well. But
but you're talking about a very idealized kind of pornography. Most pornography is violent, lacking tenderness, lacking authentic female pleasure and response. It's usually harsh and brutalizing. although you might have had a nice version.
And what about the eroticization of young girls that's prevalent in Japanese anime, for instance, or indeed or the eroticization of children in America? You know, child molestation was simply not a concept. I know it happened, but it was not a mass cultural concept when I was young. Now it's absolutely. We had a little thing on the street I lived, a thing about whether a playground should be, whether a local school should be allowed to turn the street into a playground, and they're all against it. And I said, well, I'm thinking of writing letters saying I strongly support it because I speak to children on the internet all the time, and everybody had a hearty laugh about that. It's not considered shocking anymore, you know. Nobody would answer what I meant 10 years ago.
I just wanted to share with the panel and in the room some examples of censorship. The Mapplethorpe exhibit that was censored at the Corcoran, all of those photos are in the collection of the Guggenheim. And if you go on the Guggenheim website, you won't find those images. Similarly, the Robert Giard collection is at Yale, and you can see all the portraits that he did of gay and lesbian authors, but what you won't find is his series of male nudes. They're black. So my question or statement would be that it's in a private setting where Carolee has a private gallery, she can show what she wants. But when we find ourselves in public settings or with an employer where there's payment or funding, that's typically where we encounter censorship.
Hi, I wanted to take it to a sort of the elephant in the room, because with censorship we immediately go to sexuality, but there's the censorship that's going on that Heide's trying to fight and make us more conscious of, which is the fact that you can't go into most slaughterhouses or factory farming. It's legislated that people can't go in with cameras. You're not allowed to see it. There's a real instance of censorship that we almost don't even see. We talk about, but we're not, and it's interesting that even at this panel where I think that's such a big part of your book, that we almost forget, quote unquote, that is something we need to fight, trying to figure out how to get the cameras in to the slaughterhouses and so on and so forth.
It's being called terrorism.
Yeah,
it's being called people who are trying to expose this are branded as terrorists.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, right.
Because they're terrorizing economic
profit. Right. Yeah. No, it's it's serious.
Very scared, so they're.
Yeah.
I think that historically the motivation for the suppression of sexual material in society has been that it's been viewed as a gateway issue to politics. If you look at the historical development of French erotic literature, it culminates at about the time that French revolutionary ideas are percolating at their utmost. And at the point where this kind of material is intensely censored is the point of the terror, basically. In retrospect, it would seem we might be a somewhat different race than we were then. We're surrounded by sexual imagery. There's no child who hasn't seen things that would have popped the eyes out of most of our heads as children, and yet political resistance is at its most sluggish level in my lifetime, certainly. So I think the whole issue of censorship and sexuality and politics involves a dialectic that sometimes can mean one thing and sometimes diametrically the opposite thing. There isn't necessarily a clear connection between what we censor in our personal and cultural lives and what we censor socially or what we permit to occur socially. Just a comment.
I have a question for you, Heide. There is a component that is absent from your presentation or even when you speak. Each flower is accompanied by a Latin title in which and I wonder how you articulate censorship and this use of Latin, given the fact that does it function for you as a veil, because it is not written, this is a penis of a pig. You have to have a certain sensibility and awareness of Latin to be able to see that. So it seems to me that in this discussion we are removing this veil, and that is, it is not so much obscene as it seems if you remove the Latin.
It was certainly not censorship what I had in mind, but it was something what I really like is disguising the provocative so that people don't have it in their face what is going on. Because with my former projects I had huge problems with people not even looking at it because they were so disgusted or so disturbed that there was no conversation possible. And if you now, I have almost a problem with the opposite. Everybody likes it, and my dear Liz said the other day, when we started to take you on, we expected a big controversy, and now it turns out everybody loves your work. What is going on? So, but regarding these the titles, this idea of disguising it was to not just take a Latin name, but to use a polynomial nomenclature, which was a kind of old way of describing what exactly this flower is. Then Carl Linnaeus in the 1850s has realized that it's a total chaos with every animal or plant to have whatever 10 Latin names after each other. So he changed it, and over a period of 40 years, all over the world, they agreed to this binominal nomenclature, where you have the genus and the species, I went back to this polynomial nomenclature because I wanted to describe every piece I used for making that flower, and then translate it. But the idea that you read this long Latin name gave most of the people the feeling that that is a real flower, and that was what I wanted. But there was no ever a second the idea to censor it. It was to make me, to enable me to have a conversation with people who would immediately turn away when they would know what it is.
We'll take 2 more questions. Let me just...
Thank you very much. Hi, I wanted to go back to what wasn't a question, it was more a statement from the front, but I don't think it got addressed from the floor. The idea that, and maybe Jonathan, you want to unpack this a bit because you've been a little more quiet on the panel, but you did talk about your oddly gendered male anorexia and your food problems, and I actually think that the whole, you know, our incapacity to enter the slaughterhouse and the relationship of this body of work to our food systems is something that hasn't been unpacked by the panel, and it's not directly related to censorship, but I think it is related to the kind of information we receive about food systems and how they affect us, and the beauty of these objects, but the incapacity of us to get in behind the system that actually feeds us.
Well, just somewhat related to the topic of censorship and what you just said, one of the things that's disturbing now, let's say in a live performance like this, or being off the cuff, and it goes back to what Anthony was saying, that everything is recorded, you know, and I'm not an anorexic, in case my mom should see this on YouTube. So I was just doing that to momentarily entertain the audience, but yeah, and so that part I stand by, which I think is a great thing in Heide's work, to at least try to get the message out of, we're getting more and more cut off from our food, and we all know it, and you know, we love Whole Foods and all that, but you know, it's the bulk of the human beings, at least in this country, are eating really disturbed, kind of poisoned calories, and it's creating a lot of illness and obesity and, you know, all sorts of issues. So I think that's, you know, and I think it's been brought up a little bit that that's an aspect that this work is trying to bring to the fore. So.
Hi. I'm trying to synthesize some of this, and I'm just going to put something forward. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Is it possible that, I mean, normally we think of censorship as being sort of a power thing. It's imposed, although sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's so that would be the vertical, that there's an institution. You had mentioned about the Guggenheim not having, you know, there are forces that come down to sort of create coercive forces to create consent, you know, cultural consent, and not going beyond those bounds. But then there's horizontal censorship as well, which could have something to do with the psychological or with the self-imposed, or even what you were just speaking of, Heide, which is not, you know, using the Latin. I understood totally what you were doing. You were trying to create the idea that it actually is a flower and it has a scientific name. And that's a very clever strategy. But there is in everyone's work and everyone's life, there is horizontal censorship that people impose on themselves or that their peer group imposes on them. So my feeling is that there's possibly a different mechanism from that which is imposed above in hierarchical, corporate, governmental channels, and what's imposed horizontally. I don't know if this is a valuable way of looking at it, but maybe one is better than the other, or maybe one has different ramifications than the other, or maybe it needs to be dealt with in a separate way, because it's a different structure.
Well, John Stuart Mill addressed that a long time ago, and he was talking about tyranny of the majority, the kind of peer pressure, and that he ultimately said, no, you interiorize it and it enslaves the soul. So it's this interiorized censorship which enslaves you. So yes, of course, that is a serious aspect of how speech is regulated, not through the overt censorship, which is easy to counter because it's outside, but the one that penetrates you, the one that you interiorize, the one that becomes part of you.
So I was just thinking, would you say that there's an intimate aspect and a public aspect? So the conflict moves between those two realms. What's internalized and what remains explicit and unexamined? No.
Of course, what's internalized can be even more insidious, because you can see a power structure and say they did it and that's why it's not there, as with the existence of photographs on a website. When it's internalized, it's because you've been socialized and educated in that way to perform the way those structures want you to. So I'm not disregarding that. I'm just saying.
I think it is impossibly vague. It's like saying a buzzkill is a form of censorship. I mean, of course it is, but it's not something that's forced on you by armed people. You know, we should be talking about censorship that's forced on people, in my opinion.
So the vertical.
Yeah.
My thought about what you said, which was very interesting, I like to think about the beginnings of society, even though I wasn't there, but us analysts think of humans externalizing what's inside ourselves, whether we're painting in caves, what we are separating ourselves very early on in primitive man, or how we form the early tribe. The men went out to hunt and the women stayed home to cook. They had that division of labor, except Harry was very ill one day and he decided not to go out with the band and hunt. And when they came back, the other guys were jealous. Oh, Harry's, you know, fooling around with somebody's girlfriend. So they wanted to establish some kind of censorship and control over each other. So one theory goes. And so how we develop our institutions emanate from things inside ourselves. We have a reaction formation as a defense mechanism. So what if Jesus was filled with anger and hate, but instead he created Christianity, which was a love religion, and it's a great religion, to be loving, masking his hatred. And so a religion could start from something inside himself that he externalized. This is all speculation, I understand. So at some point, there's an interface between what we externalize, in my opinion, what we externalize and create outside ourselves, and then that what is created outside ourselves comes back to haunt us and dominate us or censor us and so forth and so on. This constant interface between the individual and those cultural forces is what fascinates me. So I liked your idea.
All right. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.